Suships are one of those Yu-Gi-Oh decks that's just so incredibly Yu-Gi-Oh, you know? They clearly wanted to make a naval-themed deck with big ports and battleships, but decided it wasn't quite interesting enough. So, what did they do? Made them delicious, that's what. Well, at least they sound delicious at first, until you realise what they're made out of. I mean, to get a squid that big, you're definitely looking at some kind of kaiju here, which makes it go from delicious to slightly terrifying. Although now, I can't help but wonder what Gamesiel tastes like. But whether or not the deck is tasty is besides the point. Well, not really, because if it wasn't my favourite food, I probably wouldn't be making this deck profile. But that aside, what's up with Suships? Well, they just got some new support in BODE, that's what. While Dawn of Majesty introduced the archetype and gave them a fairly functional base to work with, the Suships were a fairly small part of the deck, and they needed something else to really work. In my case, I used the Time Thieves. Honestly, it's a fine deck the way it is, since the Time Thief boss monsters like Redua add their own power to the deck, so if you think that sounds fun, check out my older deck profile. But what I realised while building that deck is that Suships are great at both drawing cards and making a ton of rank 4 monsters. So in this deck I took it to the next level. Like the next level. It's kind of ridiculous just how much you'll be drawing and spamming Xyz monsters in this deck. You know how Flower Guardians generate an absolute ton of advantage, but can't really do anything with it? Well, this deck manages to have a similar ridiculous playstyle, but does actually have some payoff. In exchange for all of the drawing and summoning you do, you get a board that usually ends on Utopic Draco Future, Megaclops, and an Abyss Dweller, providing both resilience and graveyard disruption. All of this is backed up by the ridiculous Utopia draw engine with Xyz Gift and Xyz Change Tactics, both of which are searchable by Generation Force, and so you have some really silly results such as a hand that allowed me to draw 11 times during one turn. Sounds fun? Well, keep watching. Before we get into the deck itself, however, let's have a look at this new support and see what's worth using, shall we? Continuing the theme from Dawn of Majesty, you get 2 new main deck monsters, who then both have an equivalent extra deck monster to overlay into with Shari in order to get a bonus effect. Since the effects of being made with Shari is that you get to draw a card, this essentially gives you 2 more Xyz monsters with a draw effect. The first of these is Gunkan Suship Combos. This is probably the best of the bunch because it's not only easy for it to summon itself, but also helps summon other Suships easily. For its self-summoning, all you need to do is control a Shari or any Xyz monster with it as material, so it's easy to get started. Once on the field, it allows you to summon any other Suship from the hand, and then allows you to stack Shari on top of the deck. This combos especially well with Ikura, who, when summoned, can then special summon the Shari that you just stacked. Its Xyz equivalent is Gunkan Suship Shirairo class carrier. Now, as with all of the Suship Xyzes, they're quite battle phase focused, so while I won't really be going over those applications in detail, just keep in mind that while going second, they can definitely come in handy to take apart your opponent's board and then maybe even ATK. This one makes your Suship Xyz monsters immune to destruction and gain a bit of attack, as long as there's any field spell on the field. This is fine because its on summon effect, besides the draw that I mentioned earlier, is to search a Suship spell or trap, which basically just means the field spell. The earlier you make this the better, since then you can get more use out of the field spell, but at the very least it helps you thin your deck a bit. Then we have the Gunkan Suship Uni, which for some reason they decided should be level 5. But luckily its first effect is to change the levels of either itself or another Suship to 4 or 5 before searching a Shari. It can also special summon itself by revealing another Suship in your hand, and if it's a Shari, you get to summon that as well, but otherwise you need to return it to the deck. This card can give you quite a lot of advantage if you pull it off with a Shari, getting 2 monsters on board, drawing a card with the Xyz, and searching Shari for other Suship plays. But it takes the right hand to really make use of it, so 2 is probably the right number to run, especially since additional copies in your hand are useless. So if you do make another Suship level 5, what do you get? Well, you can make a Gunkan Suship Uniclass Super Dreadnought, a rank 5 which, when summoned with the right materials, allows you to draw a card and then attack directly. Since you'll usually be making a Megaclops first in this deck, it being a rank 5 doesn't actually get in the way of your Utopic Draco Future, so it's worth trying to make this to get the extra draw instead of wasting it on a Suship that you could have made with something else. When going second, it has a fairly powerful effect. During your main phase, or during their battle phase if you leave this on the field, it can negate opponent's monster effects equal to the amount of Suship XYZs you control. So you can fairly easily make this as your third Suship XYZ, negate 3 monsters before making your Megaclops and continuing on from there. All in all, not bad support, even if it can be a bit awkward to use sometimes. So that's the new support. Now, what do you run with it in order to make the most use of it? Let's have a look. So, with your 2 extra draws and added ability to flood the field as rank 4s, I've decided to go all in on that aspect of the deck, running as many extenders as possible for you to make a ridiculous amount of XYZ monsters with the goal of a Megaclops, a UDF, and hopefully also an Abyss Dweller. I am fully aware that this is a ridiculous deck, and you could probably tone it down a little to make room for some more hand traps or something, but if you're playing Suships, you're probably not looking for a tier 1 deck in the first place, so I stand by my decision of turning this deck into Flower Guardians 2.0. Anyway, ratio time. For the Suships, I run 3 Shari, Ikura and Shirauno, and then 2 Uni and a field spell. I've already gone over the applications in the introduction, so I won't repeat myself, but ideally you'll see these together in groups so that they can all synergize with each other. So, if you have other options, you should try and wait until you've drawn more cards if you can't properly use something like Uni or Shirauno. Since you draw so much, you will probably end up with multiples of these, but then at least you're set up for turn 3. Then, as your best starter, run 3 Rescue Rabbit. It gets 2 Shari straight from the deck, making the Suship engine live while leaving 1 in the deck for Shari or Uni's effect. It's also your best normal summon, so hopefully you'll start with it fairly often. Then we have the extenders, 3 Parallel Exceed, 3 Inferno, 3 Hat Tricker, 2 Time Thief Winder and 1 Bezel Ship, and then a Shade Brigandine, Trick Clown and Singing Lanius. A Parallel Exceed in hand means that all you need to do is make 3 XYZ monsters in order to end on a powerful board. For example, you can make all 3 Suship XYZs, drawing 3 cards along the way, and then link those into a Megaclops. That'll trigger your Parallel Exceed, with which you'll make a Gaga Magician, who revives another XYZ monster to make a UDF. It's a great card to draw along the way since it just does half of the work for you. In an emergency, you can also make the Bujin Link monster to get it out, but that's usually less optimal. Inferno is an old card that I'm sure most people have forgotten about by now, but it's actually decent in this deck. All it needs to summon itself is to banish a fire monster from the graveyard, and since all the Suships are fire, that's not hard. It's also not once per turn, so multiple copies feed into each other fairly easily. You run 3 Ash Blossoms too, so its condition is even easier to fulfill if you're going second and have hand trapped your opponent. Hat Tricker's another not once per turn summon of a level 4, only needing 2 other monsters on the field for its summon. Again, this is even easier going second since those 2 monsters can be anywhere on the field, not just on your side. Winder and Bezel Ship make a small combo package that's decent, but not quite worth running Winder at 3 for. That's because you don't really want to draw more than 1 Winder since it gives diminishing returns. Winder will detach a material from an XYZ monster to summon itself, searching Bezel Ship in the process. You then make Dagares the Timeless, who draws 2 cards before discarding a card. Since the card you discard is a Bezel Ship, you can then detach another material for it to summon itself, so you just made another Extender live while drawing 2 cards, which is a pretty powerful combo. Finally, Trick Clown's another option for your discard, or to use with the Bujin Link to gain a bit more advantage. And a single Shade Brigandine ensures it'll always be live, giving you a free monster on the field. You also only run 1 Singing Lanius, since it's an easy summon, but it's a hard once per turn, so you never want multiples. In general, this deck tries to not run too many repeats of cards that won't be live if you draw them, which is why there are multiples of the non-once per turn cards but only singles or doubles of the others. Now for the ridiculous draw engine that really makes this deck gain advantage. You run 3 Generation Force, a search card that requires an XYZ monster in order to search these next 2 cards. Those cards are XYZ Gift and XYZ Change Tactics. XYZ Gift needs you to control 2 XYZ monsters, and if you do, you can detach 2 materials to draw 2 cards. So yeah, it's a searchable pot of greed basically. Not once per turn either. Also, it gets materials into the graveyard, which can be great for cards like Trick Clown, or for getting Suships in the graveyard for Inferno. Then, XYZ Change Tactics is a continuous spell that allows you to draw a card every time Utopia monster is XYZ summoned, which is just an easy +3 since you can keep stacking Utopia monsters on top of each other. As for the ratios, I think this is probably the best way to do it, but it was a hard choice to make. I think you want 2 of each search target and 3 of the searcher, so that you have a lot of flexibility with Generation Force, letting you search whichever one is best suited for the situation. 3 Excuse Gift seemed like too much since it's not very great to start with, since it won't be live until you have 2 Excuse on the board already, but it's great to search twice throughout the combo. As for Change Tactics, 3 is too much since it's useless to ever have more than 1, but it's also nice to see in your opening hand since you can go straight into Utopias to draw 3. If you want, you could try 3 Gift and 1 Change Tactics too. Finally, run 3 Ash Blossoms so that you have something nice to draw into, that also synergizes with the deck by being a fire type. Now for the extra deck. One of each Suship gives you 3 draws throughout the combo, enough materials for a Megaclops, and the draws ensure that you can then extend afterwards. They also give the deck some going second presence, which the deck would lack otherwise. Then the 3 Utopia monsters just stack on top of each other in that order, ending on the Lightning, which again, packs a punch while going second. Then of course you run Utopic Future and Utopic Draco Future as a big boss monster for the deck that's easy to make here, especially with Gaga Gaga Magician reviving another Excuse monster to make it possible to summon immediately. It also gives your UDF the added ability of making an Excuse monster that you target's attack go up to 4000, while negating its effects, so suddenly a used up Dagaris or Emerald becomes a huge beat stick. Speaking of those two, they're both versatile extenders, with Dagaris either discarding something to draw 2, perfect for getting a Trick Clown or a Bezel Ship in the graveyard, or can revive something like a Rescue Rabbit if it hasn't used its effects yet. Emerald can revive a Shari so that your Suship monsters can activate their effects, or it can shuffle back your Sharis in order to use them all over again. You can also just recycle your Utopia monsters to be able to draw 3 all over again with this effect. Then to end your board, Abyss Dweller is the best general use Excuse monsters to put down going first, since you don't really want Baguska negating your UDF. Midu is also here as an alternative boss monster, and a good target for Shade Brigandine if you happen to draw it. Finally, your Link monsters are Megaclops, a hard to out boss monster that can also recycle your Excuse monsters while turning your opponent's card into a material. This can even scoop up a trap to add to Redoer for extra removal, so keep that kind of interaction in mind if your opponent has a continuous trap on the field like Imperial Order. Then Bujinki Ahashima is there to fix bad hands, getting some cards into the graveyard if you draw them too soon, while also forcibly making another Excuse monster. It's not at all as essential as it used to be, but it's good to have as a backup option, and gives you some back row removal in a pinch as well. Now, just to preempt some comments, you might be wondering where Unexpected Die is. The thing is, it's a dead card unless you have it in your opening hand, and it will always be a brick if you draw it, sometimes stopping your entire combo dead in its tracks. Also, it conflicts with Rescue Rabbit, who's a better starter anyway, so really the deck was just better off without it. Then if you wanted some other extenders for whatever reason, Foolish Burial can send a Clown or a Bezel Ship for easy materials, and Monster Reborn can bring back a whole Excuse monster if needed, so they can be quite strong. And then Pitting Cesser has also an option since you'll be able to draw a few times without getting a monster in the graveyard, so it's definitely possible to use it as an extra level 4 material. So that's the deck. Now time for some replays. If you've been enjoying the video so far, make sure to give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Also, I went over some of the important combos this deck can do during the deck profile portion, so I won't be going over everything in such detail this time. This first combo opens with Rescue Rabbit and Change Tactics, which is already going to be enough to get a ton of draws. Start with the Rabbit getting 2 Shari on board, which then allows you to use Ikura to summon itself. Somehow it manages to hit the last Shari, so there's no reason to not start making Utopias now. While stacking them on top of each other, we hit a Generation Force and an Excuse Gift, both of which are live Pot of Greeds. With the Suships, we make another Excuse to draw again, and we can now use the extenders in our hand with Hat Tricker and Winder both being live. Winder searches the Bezel Ship, so we need to get that into the graveyard. That's easily done with Dagaris, discarding it and drawing 2 more cards, getting a Parallel Exceed in the process. Now it's as easy as making a Megaclops to trigger the Parallel Exceed. It summons another copy of itself, which allows me to make a Gaga Gaga Magician, who can then bring back a Suship from the graveyard to overlay into your Utopic Draco Future. We can now extend even further with Uni and the Bezel Ship in the graveyard. After making Uni into a level 4, you can make an Abyss Dweller and then your turn was a full board. In this second hand, we have a Rescue Rabbit as well as a few basic extenders, so to make a full board we're going to have to draw a lot. After getting 4 monsters on board, you can now make your first Suship XYZ who draws a live generation force, which we use to get a change tactics. After summoning Lanius, we used a spell and start making Utopias. That gets us an XYZ gift, a parallel XYZ, and a live hand full of Suships with extenders to spare. Uni summons itself in a Shari, making them level 5 to get yet another draw and stacking a Shirayo on top of the deck so that you can immediately summon it. It's now easy to make a Megaclops, triggering a parallel XYZ you drew along the way. There's no need to revive an XYZ monster with this board since you have so many options, so instead make a Daigusto Emerald to shuffle back your Utopias and draw a card. It's a Nikura and Shirayo hasn't used its ability yet, so that can summon it and then stack Sharis on top of your deck. You now make room on your board by making your UDF before drawing a Shari with Ikura to summon it. You can now make an Abyss Dweller, and since they're back in your extra deck, you can get 3 more draws by making your Utopias again, drawing an Ash Blossom for more interruption. Finally, here's a very Suship focused hand with Shirayo, Ikura, and Change Tactic. Normal summon Shirayo, use its effect to summon Ikura and stack your deck, and then excavate the stacked Shari to summon it. The second Ikura can now just summon itself. Now start drawing with your Utopias and Suships to try and get all the extenders you'll need. We end up with both XYZ gifts and a generation force, so just use it on a second change tactic to thin out your deck. Winder does its summon and search, so we use Inferno to make a Dagares to get full use out of it. We already know we have full combos thanks to the parallel XYZ, so it's now about how much more we can get out of it. Both parallel XYZs trigger off of the Megaclops, making you a magician who summons back a Suship to make your UDF. You now use your Bezel Ship and Inferno extenders to make an Emerald to summon back a Shari, stack the deck, and then use your other Inferno to make an Abyss Dweller. Now, if that Emerald survives until next turn, you can boost its attack up to 4000 with your UDF thanks to Gagaga's effect, and then easily ATK. So that's the deck. What did you think? Will you try running Suships like this? Or do you have another idea for them? Tell me down in the comments, and while you're there, don't forget to give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching!